Redbourn. How I do love to say that. Another lovely autumn day, and I hope you're all enjoying it. As always, I'd like to thank all the generous people, including the Parish Council, who've donated to keep these calls free of charge for our listeners over the last few months, and I hope you've all enjoyed dialing in. They are coming to an end, of course, only a few more calls to go. So I'll take this opportunity to say, if there's anybody that you're desperate to hear from, please do let us know, and we'll try and squeeze them in the remaining calls that we have. As ever, our technical team, which are very clever behind the scenes, should be making this available live on the Redbourners Facebook page and afterwards both there and on our website. And as in previous weeks, everyone bar today's speakers is on mute, so you can make as much noise as you want to. Sadly, we won't have the pleasure of hearing Will's dog bark today, by the way, because I believe he's away, but he'll be back again next week. And with no further ado, a somewhat unusual departure, I'm now handing over to Ivan Hickmott, who's going to lead today's call. So hello, Ivan, and over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It's Ivan here. Hello, and as Simon says, it's a lovely day. The reason that we're swapping over roles, and this is my first time as host, so you'll all have to put up with whatever it is that I managed to get wrong, but the reason that we're swapping is that actually Simon is one of our two guests today, one of our two celebrities. He's joined by Kelly O'Brien, who I'll talk to in a little while. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
There we go. So everybody's here. And the subject of today's call is the joy of books. Now, I happen to know from having spoken to both Simon and Kelly in the days leading up to this call that they are two of the most fantastic and enthusiastic advocates of reading and books that you could ever wish to meet. And you're going to hear why they have that enthusiasm over the next 30 minutes. You probably know Simon not just as the host of these calls over the last 6 months. He's also a parish councillor. He also organised Redbourn Berry Mill bread deliveries for a number of months early on in the lockdown. But he's also, and he keeps it fairly quiet, an experienced and I would say accomplished author. So I'm going to ask him some questions about that. But firstly, Simon, my first question to you is, tell us, why do you love reading? What is it so special about reading?
Thanks, Simon. First of all, particular thanks for calling me a celebrity. I've never been called a celebrity before, so I'm sure it'll never happen again.
And it's not going to happen again.
It's never going to happen again, no. Why do I love reading? Well, I mean, as I said to you earlier, I could talk on this, I could answer this one in 2 hours, so to try and keep it short, I think I just become wholly absorbed in other worlds. That was the sort of message I got to myself when I was thinking about this. I get brilliant relationships with the characters, and I get totally moved and emotionally involved in books to an extraordinary degree. And I just think it's the most wonderful, almost the most wonderful thing I do in life is actually reading books.
Like a hot bath.
Even better than a hot bath. But yes, right. What a wonderful experience, and I just love it. And I devour them, as you know. I'm constantly reading all the time. I'm constantly ordering books, and I just can't get enough of them.
And I wonder, Simon, when that love of reading first began to materialise in your life, what books do you remember from your childhood, for instance?
Yeah, I thought about that actually, and I do remember as a very little boy, so probably a toddler sort of age, those lovely little Beatrix Potter hardback books, you know, the little tiny ones, just a few inches big with the pretty pictures of Peter Rabbit and all that sort of thing. I can distinctly remember the tactile sort of touching them and enjoying looking at the pictures and so on. But obviously that was when I was really, really young. As I grew up, I think I was very fortunate because I just got exposed to some fantastic books. And the ones that really spring to mind are C.S. Lewis's The Narnia books, which I've reread 19 times since, by the way, and they're still brilliant to read as a grown-up. And The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, all those sort of things, round about when I was 10 or 11 years old. And then as I went through my sort of teens, I got into sci-fi and stuff and all sorts of other things, which we may talk about in a minute.
We will. So I was going to ask you, how have your tastes kind of evolved as you've become the mature man that you now are? You know, what sort of things have you grown into? Which sort of things have you begun to put to one side, perhaps?
I've got to say, I've been called mature now as well as a celebrity. That's also never going to happen again. So thank you very much. You'll be top of my Christmas card list. I think, so I suppose getting into the Narnia books and the Hobbit and those sort of things around about 10, 11, 12 years old, I suppose I always had an inclination towards fantasy, which is a very broad term. So things that are out of the ordinary, I suppose, so not humdrum sort of books. So I've always liked things that are a bit different. So growing up through my teens, I got into science fiction in a big way, but I basically devoured everything that was on offer. And it wasn't until probably I was at sixth form that I settled on, I suppose, what one might loosely call the classics. So these days I love Dickens, Dostoevsky, all sort of heavy-going stuff that a lot of people think is miserable, but I think is absolutely fantastic. And of course, along the way as well, I got into Keats in a massive way, and I'm a really, really big Keats fan. So I love poetry too, all the romantic poets, but particularly Keats. And I haven't really dropped anything. I mean, I still do read the occasional science fiction book, but not often. But anything else I'll read. I'm almost a sucker for any book recommendation that comes out. I'll read it, and it never ends.
Tell us about your relationship with Charles Dickens.
Well, where do I start? I mean, I've actually, I ought to say that I think a lot of people get put off Charles Dickens at school because they're taught it at school, and I've had lots of conversations with people that said they sort of were placed great expectations of something that was forced on them or something at too young an age. Which is very, very sad because they're so wonderful. But I got into Dickens properly, I suppose, giving my age away over here, probably when I was about 30 or 40 or something, and have read all of them multiple times. And I'm now rereading them all. In fact, I'm right up to our mutual friend now, reading them in the order he wrote them. And I just think they're the most wonderful books. They cover every aspect of humanity, and they're just absolutely wonderful. And I couldn't do without them. And in fact, if it was a desert island disc type thing, and I could take one book away with me, well, I'd like to pitch for the whole complete works if I could of Charles Dickens. I just love them.
And I recall when you and I first got to know one another, and I still have to read it amongst the many books that I have on my shelf. You said, Ivan, you really ought to read Bleak House, and you were kind enough to gift me a copy, which is sitting in my front room as we speak. So Simon, let's change gears a little bit. Somewhere along the line, you've painted a picture of yourself as an avid reader, immersed in all sorts of stuff. And then something triggered you to decide to write a book, which is not a small decision to take. I mean, talk us through what happened before we get into hearing about your career as an author. What triggered you to decide to write a book?
I think it's probably going to sound a bit odd, really, and I'm sure it's an unusual trigger for writers, but it was actually the music of Pink Floyd. As I think you know, I absolutely love Pink Floyd. It's one of my grand passions, as Keats would say. And I had the idea, I can't remember how many years ago now, but a long time ago, I just wanted to write I was so moved by them, and so I loved them so much. I wanted to write a book about the impact they had on me. So as a non-famous person, albeit a celebrity for this call only, I just wanted to write a sort of an autobiography based on the music of Pink Floyd, to how they wrote the soundtrack to my life. And in fact, funnily enough, one of the funniest questions I ever got asked was, how did you persuade them to do that? Of course, they didn't know they were doing it. But, so I wrote this book called All That You Touch, which is about how Pink Floyd wrote the soundtrack to my life. And then I sort of got the bug, and I thought, this is great fun. I enjoyed it. Clearly and self-evidently, I'm not writing anything, A, that popular, and B, that good. But I love doing it, and I sort of caught the bug.
Wonderful stuff. So just tell us about your career as an author, because you've written more than one book and over the years. So just share with us, unashamedly plug your portfolio of books for just a couple of minutes.
Well, so you don't have to love Pink Floyd to read my first book. That's called All That You Touch, which Pink Floyd fans out there will know is the opening line of a song of theirs from Dark Side of the Moon. But that was very, very much a one-off, and it's not like anything I've written since, because that was fact. That's based on my life and just describing what Pink Floyd mean to me. After that, I wrote what I consider to be, and jokingly called, my masterpiece, which is a book called Gender, which is about an individual that's destined to go inside a Picasso painting, because I love Picasso as well, and fertilise a new gender, and all the sort of adventures he has on the way. And that's an absolute romp, and it's really fun. It's a huge, huge, big, thick book. I lost count of the words. It's a massive book, but it's really great fun to write. And if it's anything like as much fun to read as it was to write, hopefully people would enjoy it. that's my sort of big novel. In addition to that, I've got 2 books of short stories out. Excuse me. Stories of increasing length, where every story is just longer than the last one. And quite recently, stories of decreasing length, where every one is shorter than the last one, obviously. And I'm now working on stories of identical length, which is a bit of a challenge, where every story will have exactly the same word count. And those short stories cover things as various as Brexit and jealousy and the Badger Police and all sorts of odd things. A really, really eclectic mix. And the last one I wrote, which hasn't been, quote, launched yet, is called the SPC, and it's about a secret society that's so secret you don't know you're in it, which I enjoyed writing immensely. And that will be available now, and it will be at the forthcoming Village Market, as will all the other ones.
You've answered one of my questions, which was how do folks get hold of your books? You've just answered that. Through the Village Market, and presumably they can Google you and get to the books that way.
Yeah, and they're all on. They should be on all good online stores like Foiled and Blackwell's and even Amazon and things like that. They're available out there.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure. So I reckon you've written six books. Is that right? I think
I think that's right. Yes, that's right. Yep.
Wow.
And more on the way.
So now the question that all authors must hate but be familiar with responding to: what is your favourite book? And the thing is, I'm only going to let you have one. What's your favourite book?
Okay, well, it is extraordinarily difficult, Ivan, and you're right. This was the answer I dreaded, really. And what I'm going to answer it, if I may, by just reading out an extract. And during that extract, it will tell you the name of the book. And it's not going to take long. Don't worry, I'm not going to read into Kelly's time. So this is a very, very famous extract from my famous book, my favourite book. Anyway, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids, nobody's around, nobody big I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do is I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going. I have to come out from somewhere and catch them. That's all I do all day. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really like to be. So The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, my most reread book, my most loved book. I've read it, I've lost count of the number of times I've read it, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And that's my one. The
Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger.
That's it.
That's the one you recommend. Thank you for that. And my next question is kind of a similar vein, but with a different perspective. Not only are we in some form of lockdown, but the Christmas period is looming. What 2 books would you say actually to others? Why don't you? That's what I suggest you read over a holiday period. What 2 books would you recommend?
Well, one's a really easy one, because I reread it every Christmas actually, and it's Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Right.
For those that haven't read it, it's not a long book. It's not one of his epics. It's a novella really. You can read it in an evening. And I'm sure everybody knows the story. It's a wonderful story. But I actually do reread it myself every single year in December. Always cry when it gets to the Tiny Tim bit, even though we know he's okay in the end. And I just absolutely love it. And I think it's a wonderful message, and it's a brilliant, brilliant book. The second one, I thought about this long and hard. And there's so many. But I'd probably opt for Victor Hugo's Notre Dame de Paris, or in the English translation, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is, again, just a wonderful plot, and you can get really involved and deeply set in it, and it's just the most wonderful. So those would be my 2.
And would one of those 2 be the book that you buy your best friend for Christmas, I wonder?
No, I'm gonna try and get another one. I'm gonna sneak Dickens in again one more time, and I think if I had to choose a book for my best friend, which indeed I did, by the way, I'd choose Great Expectations, which many people think is the greatest novel in the English language. Obviously, these things are subjective, but it's just the most wonderful book, the most wonderful story, and that's the one I'd do by him, Great Expectations.
By Charles Dickens. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Simon, thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts on the joys of books, the joys of reading. It comes across very strongly how important books are in your life, but also a strong sense of where actually writing books is an important part of Simon Veglow as a human being. So thanks for taking 10 minutes or so to share those thoughts with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This week we don't have Will with us. He's taking a week's much deserved holiday, and it's kind of hard to think about how we could try and replicate what Will does so wonderfully every week. So I cheated a little bit. There's two things. Firstly, I dropped Will an email and said, "Ooh, if you can't make the call this week, I wonder if you could answer a couple of questions for me." So wait for it. When I asked him what his favourite book is, you'll never believe it, and I'll read his email to you. For a classic, it would have to be Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So Will and Simon are singing off the same hymn sheet, if you'll forgive that dreadful pun. Will describes it as a brilliant story with adventure, intrigue, mistaken identity, and ambition, and an exploration about friendship and loyalty and money and what really matters in life. So that was Will's first recommendation. And his second thought was, he says, for a more modern read, I very much like it, the work of Ian McEwan, but if I have to opt for one thing, and this is a book I don't know of, he says it would be the book entitled Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. Patrick Suskind, S-U-S-K-I-N-D, which is a dark tale exploring the shadows of human need and behaviour through arguably the strongest, but often in literature less deeply explored, sense of smell, which sounds like an absolutely fascinating book to read, and I shall look it out for sure. So that's what would be Will's two recommendations. And in chatting to Kelly, our next guest, she triggered a thought process for me, which I'd just like to share with you. I hope I'm not being too indulgent. She triggered me to begin to think about what was my favourite childhood book. And that for me was an easy one to answer, in that I remember reading repeatedly a book called Shadow the Sheepdog by Enid Blyton. Goodness knows how many times I read it, but for the life of me, you know, as I'm now in my 60s, I was trying to figure out, why was that book so special to me? And I've been meaning to buy the thing for years, so I got hold of a copy the other day, and suddenly when I read on the back cover, something hit me like a brick in the face. I'll just read it to you. Johnny has always longed for a dog of his own. His dream comes true when he's allowed to keep Shadow, the naughtiest of Jessie's pups. The two are soon inseparable friends. And as soon as I read that, I realised that I had a happy childhood, but I was actually quite lonely, a single mother, much older brothers and sisters. I had my best mate was my dog Peter, and that has translated into a lifelong relationship and love of dogs. And for those of you that know me will see me wandering around the village with my two golden retrievers. So they're a big part of my life, and I've been able to learn that reading in my childhood really was a fantastic support mechanism and has influenced me very much to this day. So I hope that makes sense, and I would encourage all of you to think about the books that you really got a lot from as a child. And I know that our next guest, Kelly, has a passion for the value of books and reading for children of all ages. So Kelly, good morning to you.
Good morning, Ivan.
Welcome to our community call. Now, I've got lots of questions to ask you, Kelly, but I'm going to start with, really as a link from my own ramblings about Shadow the Sheepdog. What was your favourite book growing up?
Okay, so I think my favourite book was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I was given a very beautiful hardback copy of this as a child by my godmother, Penny Atkinson, who actually lived in the village, and it's a beautiful copy with wonderful colour illustrations through it. So it's actually physically a really beautiful book to read, to hold, and so I think it's been a favourite partly for that reason, but also that magic of finding a key and finding a door in a wall and going through and finding something secret and magical. I think that really resonated with me as a child, and I think as an adult it's kind of remained a really beautiful book for me. I think it's a book that's full of hope, we start off in the book with characters that are going through a really dreadful time. We have a sort of a pale and uninteresting little girl who's been bereaved, and a sickly little boy, and it's kind of a real analogy for darkness and depression, which is quite unusual in a children's book. But then as you go through the book, kind of there's this kind of really amazing growth and renewal, which they find the garden, and the garden comes back to life. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. It's kind of like the book starts in winter and then comes through into the spring, into summer. So I really love that about the book. And also I think I love gardening as well. So I didn't have any interest in gardening as a child, but as an adult I love gardening, and I love that time from going from winter when everything's bare to everything blossoming. And I think at this particular time in our lives with COVID, I got a lot of comfort from the garden coming back to life. And even though kind of the world seemed to be quite a dark place and things were really difficult, you kind of have that comfort in nature, in that the roses will still bloom, the plants will still come up, and there's that kind of hope and healing in that I think I find in the book as an adult, which I probably didn't grasp as a child. But so it's a very special book.
You demonstrate beautifully the connection between us as adults and the things we loved reading as children.
Yes, I think you can go back to a book you read as a child and read it again and just get so many different things. So I think just like Simon, I think there's a great deal of worth in rereading books that you loved and enjoyed. And just like you can rewatch a film and get something different out of it, or even you've forgotten parts of the plot and different nuances in the book, I think it's a really wonderful thing to revisit books that you loved. So, and this is a good time to do that.
So tell me, why do you, just in a minute, why do you love books and reading so much? Why is it so special a part of your life, I wonder?
I think very similar to Simon, it's something that I get completely absorbed in, and I love being in someone else's story, in their emotions, and I also get very involved in their feelings and their stories. I think unlike a movie where you sort of spend just an hour or two with a movie, you kind of live with a book for, days, weeks, hours, and you are in that person's shoes, or in that person's thoughts. And I think I get enormous depth of experience and feeling from doing that. And I just absolutely do love I love reading, and I think it takes us out of our own space and our own experience. I know I've had a point in my life where I wasn't very well and I couldn't get out of the house. So I was kind of, stuck indoors, and my house was on hold. My life was on hold. And I think that actually when you're stuck in four walls, you can read a book and just travel. You can experience another person's life, another person's experiences. If you can't get out yourself and climb mountains or cross oceans, you can read, and that takes you beyond your own experience and into a different world of imagination. And I think it's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful life-enhancing thing to have.
I'm desperate to ask you this question now you've led me to it. These calls were born, these community calls were born as a response to coronavirus and the lockdown. That's why we decided to run these calls. So I just wonder, what have you most enjoyed reading during the last few months of lockdown and all the stuff that we're having to deal with?
This is a very difficult question, because I have read lots of different things, and because I work in a secondary school, I read lots of young adult books. So I've enjoyed reading lots of those sorts of books, which have been great. And I've read the sequel to it's a prequel actually to the Hunger Games series, which has been quite a terrific read. But what I picked, which I thought your listeners might be interested, is a book called The Salt Path, which is by Raina Wynn. And it's a true story about a couple who've lived all their life on their farm. Their children have grown up, and then a terrible thing happens. They lose their farm. So their farm is their home, it's their everything. And they've invested in a business and it goes under. They lose the farm, and simultaneously the author's husband, he is diagnosed with a terminal illness. So they've absolutely lost everything.
Right.
And they're homeless. And so they've lost their livelihood, their home, and they decide, instead of being homeless and going into the shelter, they decide to pack everything they've got up into a couple of rucksacks and walk the southwest coast parks all the way from Somerset to Dorset. And it's an epic sort of 600-mile journey. And they have very little resources. So they're wild camping, they're living off pot noodles, and it is a wonderful book. It's not a romantic book about a romantic journey. It's a nitty-gritty book about the harshness of this experience, on the way people think that they're tramps, they end up, not cutting their hair, but they also have a freedom, and it's a liberating experience. And he gets a lot better. The physical endurance of walking every day is...
Tell us, you're doing a great job selling the book, beautifully so.
Yes.
Just remind us of the title and the author again.
It's called The Salt Path by Raina Wynn.
Raina Wynn,
The
Salt
Raina
Path.
Wynn. We'll put it on the Facebook page after if anyone's interested. It's quite a new book, recently written book, and I did enjoy it terribly going on this journey with them. It's very well written, and it's sort of this freedom of being alongside the sea again, which is again liberating at this time. I think also we went to Cornwall on holiday last year and did do a little bit of walking along the coast, and I think that feeling of walking along by the sea and the wind in your face is kind of an absolutely wonderful thing. So I would highly recommend it.
I happen to know from our discussion last week that you're very passionate about books and children. How do you get kids to love reading? And tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about that, but also the work that you do.
Okay, so I started off. So after I had my own children, I was a childminder. So I stayed at home and then had other children in, and we very much based the activities we did on books. So kind of we'd take a book for the week and then we'd do lots of fun things around it. So we went on a bear hunt and we made Gruffalo crumble and did all those wonderful things around books. And I think kind of my love of working with children probably came from that early years experience of reading with young children and really engaging them in stories, which I think is kind of the foundation for anybody learning to read, learning to love books, and for any parent or grandparent. If you can instill that love of reading with young children, then that is, laying the foundation for the future. And it's a wonderful thing to share books with children. And it's a time spent together. And it's a time where you stop, there's no digital devices, there's no TV, and you spend one-to-one 100% attention with the child to read. And so I think that's where my journey started. And then from there, I went and volunteered at the Redbourn Community Library, and I did the rhyme time, so singing with the children, rhymes with puppets, which was a joy to do. And that again is incredibly important to sort of start children on their phonics journey, because rhymes are full of rhyme and alliteration, and those kind of phonic sounds are really essential at that time. So that's why historically we've read to children and sung those classic nursery rhymes to children. So, and then going on, I think it's just really important to embed special times to read. So give children routines so that you do have a story at bedtime, and then that comes into independent reading as they go on. And I think for me, libraries have been very, very important. So I remember my mother taking me to Hitchin Library, actually, to choose books as a child. And so I'm very passionate about library services, both the public library. I went on to work for the public Radlet and school libraries. And I think enabling children to have access to library spaces that are inspiring and vibrant and have activities for them is a really wonderful way of getting children interested in books. So author visits and clubs. I have a book babble club that I run for teenagers at the school I work in, and just having lots going on that is of interest to kids, I think. So we have Harry Potter book nights and different things that might engage them in reading. So, but I think reading's so important. I think that they have done studies that show that children that read for pleasure, it kind of outpaces their background and socioeconomic group in terms of their future outcome. So I think having wonderful libraries where children can go and borrow is so important to sort of socially enable anybody from whatever their background to achieve in life. So I think books, you know, it is a leisure activity, it's a thing that we enjoy and that is pleasurable, but it actually can enhance people's outcomes in the future. I think they've shown it can help children in every subject.
As I listen to you, I guess I'm thinking that also it's not just about the benefits to children, but actually the act of giving the art of reading to children, whether you're an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, a